Hi everyone, I'm Carl and I hope you're all doing great. In this video, I'm going to go over how I built this display base for January's Encounter 10x10 challenge. By the time this video goes online, I should have finished the mini that goes onto it as well, but that's something we'll have to look at another time. I've left timestamps in the description for different parts of the build, so feel free to jump around. And if you have any suggestions or questions, I'm always happy to get comments. I started off by marking out a template with a 4cm circle inside a 10cm circle. I then used this to mark and cut a few circles out of foam board and cardboard. The foam board I used here had its paper layer removed. In this case, I sliced it off with a knife, so it's not perfectly smooth. Since I wanted the base to have a layer of card at the bottom for durability, I cut the inner circles in both foam board layers, and one of the card layers. That way the base won't stick out too far over the top. I glued together the two layers of foam board with the card layer with the hole in it. This gave me access to the well, so I could sand the inside before gluing it in with the rest of the base. Then I glued the rest of the base on, including one of the smaller foam circles. I glued the other foam circle to one of the small card circles. At this point, I started to texture the surface. I just drew cobblestones on with a pencil, making sure that they lined up between the display base and the gaming base. This technique is the same one I used in the other videos and which I borrowed from Gerard Boom. Though I did need a fair bit of pressure as the foam board doesn't respond as easily as XPS foam. Next up, I added some pieces of cork and XPS to represent fallen masonry, pillars and the edge of the channel, and threw some brickwork on the edge too. Then I glued in the last bit of the pillar. This was left off till now as it would just make it harder to draw the bricks on the edge. After some trimming, I sanded the edge of the piece and stuck in some filler over it before sanding it again. It's not perfect and another pass with filler and sandpaper would have made it really smooth, but this is enough for me. To seal and harden the foam, I painted it up with a mixture of PVA glue and black paint. This works the same as Mod Podge and black paint, except that it isn't waterproof. Since I'm going to hit it with a spray sealer later anyway, that's not going to be a big problem. To undercoat the pieces, I sprayed them separately with anthracite grey. Then I installed the gaming base in the well, lined it up and gave it a light spraying with white, this time focusing on the central area. The idea was to make it look like this part was more lit than the rest. At this point I started dabbing some colors on with a sponge. Greens, blues, anything you think would make a good undertone. Then I dropped a few watered down browns on the piece. They're practically washes, super runny. This is the same technique I used on the Dwarven monument a few months back. When the browns were dry, I added on some Payne's Grey and dabbed it away from the higher areas with a paper towel. Then I went in with a few layers of dry brushing to highlight everything up. Again, I tried to focus the highlight in the area around the gaming base. Next, I painted the rim of the bases black and gave everything a coat of spray sealer. After this, I painted over the entire piece with a PVA and ink mix. I showed this in my last video, and to be honest, I really think I used way too much ink here. But aside from covering up all the undertones, I think it turned out okay. Once this was dry, I started to add some homemade texture paint. This is just a mix of PVA, brown paint and construction sand. Once I had put down the sand in all the light areas, I added some black paint into the mix and got a darker texture paint, which I did in all the shadow areas. This worked out really well, as I was able to blend the places where the two meet, creating a nice smooth transition. I also used a wet brush to sweep some of the texture paint around, making it look a bit more like dirt. Then I just waited for it to dry and dry brushed it. The light areas got some yellow ochre and ivory, and the dark areas just got a little raw sienna and a tiny amount of yellow ochre. Next up, sunflock. It's always nice to add a bit of vegetation, but in this case I really wanted it to cover up a bubble on the pillar that's sticking out of the channel. I also added some to the floor of the channel, so it looks like there are some weeds in there. This was all sealed in with some surgical spirit and PVA. The theme for this month's Encounter 10 by 10 challenge was This is the Way, and I want this to be a scene where a monster is tracking an injured prey through some ruins. I knew I wanted a trail of blood drops, but I didn't want to make it too over the top. This meant that the drops might be a bit hard to see, so I added a piece of tissue paper soaked in PVA to represent a bloody rag. This is a lot easier to see, so I'm hoping it will work to draw the eye towards itself, allowing the viewer to find the droplets. In the end, I didn't like the way this patch worked, so I put in a slightly larger one, shaded with seraphim sepia and painted it yellow ochre, then added some lines in ivory to represent texture. The blood on the rag is just Carrower crimson and cadmium red. I think I should have made this brighter or placed it further away from the dirt, as it blends in a bit too much. I tried adding some nuln oil all around it, but I don't think it did much really. After a final round of spray sealer, I taped around the base and started to pour in some resin. Now, the resin I used is a bit old, around 2 years, so I wasn't sure it would work. I added in a tiny droplet of seraphim sepia to the mix, though I don't think that did anything, but the color turned out perfect for what I wanted. There was a tiny bit of leakage, so when I pulled the tape off, I ripped up the paint on parts of the base. This turned out to be an easy fix, just repainted it with PVA and black paint. The adhesive left on the resin was easily buffed off with some rubbing alcohol, though I gave it a light sanding too just in case. I haven't gotten it completely off yet, though I will be giving it another cleanup before I finish off the project. And that is that for the base. By the time this video goes online, I will hopefully be close to finishing the miniature for it. Even if I don't make it in time for the challenge submission, It's no big deal, and I'll still have gotten a nice mini and got to hang out with a bunch of fun people. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me next week for another one. In the meantime, take care, stay safe and have a great week.